When you hear the phrase working class, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Is it about how much money someone makes? The kind of job they have? Well, what if that whole way of thinking misses the point completely? In this explainer, we're going to define the proletariat not as some vague social label, but as a precise scientific category, one with a very specific history and a very specific role in the world.
So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll nail down the scientific definition and see just how different it is from the common one. Then we're going to uncover the pretty violent historical origins of this class. After that, we'll explore what this framework describes as its unique revolutionary mission. And to wrap it all up, we'll see who exactly makes up the proletariat in the 21st century.
All right, let's dive right into that definition. To really get this, we have to kind of set aside our usual ideas of blue-collar or low income. We need to look at this from a completely different angle. It's not about what you earn, it's about how you get by.
And right here, you can see the huge shift in thinking. The common definition, it's all about appearances, right? Your lifestyle, your job title. But the scientific definition, it's structural. It asks a much more fundamental question. To survive in this world, what is the one thing you have that you are forced to sell?
And here it is, the absolute core of the idea. The proletariat is defined by what it doesn't own. If you don't own the factory, the farm, the code, the office building, what they call the means of production, then you have to sell the only thing you do own, your ability to work, your time, your energy, your skills, your labor power. That relationship right there is the whole story.
So, okay, how does this relationship actually make a profit for the owners? It's through something called surplus value. Think about it workday. A worker creates a certain amount of value. They get a piece of that value back in their paycheck, but the rest of it, the extra, the surplus, that's kept by the owner. And according to this theory, that unpaid labor isn't just some profit. It's the source of all profit. Let's just break it down really simply. Step 1, you get a job, you agree on a wage. Step 2, in your time at work, you produce goods or services worth way more than that wage. And step 3, the owner of the business keeps the difference. That gap between what you're paid and the value you create, that's the profit.
And this example just makes it crystal clear why income is not the deciding factor. Take a highly paid software engineer at a giant tech company. She still has to sell her labor to live, right? She doesn't own the servers or the intellectual property. In this analysis, she's a proletarian. Now compare that to a small shop owner who owns his little store and maybe has one employee. Because he owns his own means of making a living, he's considered petty bourgeois. It's all about ownership. Okay, so this brings up a really big question. If this class is defined so specifically, where did it come from? I mean, it wasn't always here. It's not some natural feature of society. It had to be created. And the source material we're looking at is pretty blunt about this. The proletariat was, quite literally, manufactured. It was created through a long and often violent process of dispossession called primitive accumulation. This was the act of separating millions of people from their ability to provide for themselves. And you can see this brutal logic play out all over the world. For centuries in Europe, peasants farmed on common land. Then came the enclosures, where that land was systematically fenced off and privatized, forcing people off the land and into the cities looking for work. And you see the exact same thing happening with things like the 1913 Natives Land Act in South Africa, dispossessing the majority of the population from the land to create a massive, cheap labor force for the mines and farms. This quote really captures the dark irony of it all. This new class of people was suddenly free, but they were free in two ways. They were free from their connection to the land, sure, but they were also free from any other way to survive. Their only choice was to sell their labor to the new owners of factories and mines. So we've got a class that's defined by not owning anything, and that was created through force. But the analysis doesn't stop there. It argues that these very conditions, they give the proletariat a completely unique and revolutionary mission in history. You've probably heard this famous quote before, and it gets right to the point. The idea is that because the proletariat owns no productive property, it has zero interest in keeping a system that's based on the private ownership of that property. It can't just fight for a bigger piece of the pie. And that is the absolute key. For this class to truly liberate itself, it can't just get a better deal. According to this theory, the only way to end its own exploitation is to get rid of the entire system of private ownership of the things we all need to live, the factories, the land, the infrastructure, completely. This leads to the famous gravedigger concept. It's this wild idea that the capitalist class, in its endless search for profit, actually creates the very force that will eventually replace it. By bringing millions of workers together into these huge interconnected workplaces, it accidentally teaches them how to organize collectively, and it shows them that they are the ones who actually make society run. So this makes the proletariat's mission a universal one. The argument is that by getting rid of the basis of its own exploitation, private property, it gets rid of the basis for all exploitation. The ultimate goal, then, is to bring production under the conscious, democratic control of society as a whole, and in doing so, end the existence of classes forever.
Okay, I know a lot of that might sound very historical, very 19th century, but let's pull this right into the modern day. Using this scientific definition, who is the proletariat today?
Well, the scale is just mind-blowing. Based on that core definition of being a wage laborer, the global proletariat is estimated to be more than 3.3 billion people. Just think about that. It's the single largest class in all of human history, and it's not even close.
And this class looks like our modern world. It's the person packing your box in an Amazon warehouse, the person assembling your phone at Foxconn, a teacher or a nurse in a public hospital in South Africa. It's the retail worker at Cape Union Mart, the coal miner in Mpumalanga, the call center agent, and yep, even the software developer. What do they all have in common? They all have to sell their ability to work in order to live.
And here's the fascinating point. This analysis argues that, far from being broken up, modern capitalism has actually linked this global class together more tightly than ever. Think about the global supply chain that brings you almost everything you own. It materially connects the miner in Congo, the factory worker in Vietnam, the software engineer in California, and the delivery driver at your door into one single massive international process of production.
So this is what we're left with. The sources we've explored argue that if you see the world this way, not as a bunch of competing nations or different income levels, but as a fundamental struggle between a tiny class that owns everything and a vast global class that does all the work, then the solutions to our biggest crises start to look very, very different. It leaves us with a final, massive question. What does it mean for the 21st century to see over 3 billion people not just as individual workers, but as a single, unified international class with the potential power to remake the entire world?